Inchai Comic Guy here, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than usual. The people working on Elysian Fields, a Comicsgate book, reached out to me and asked me if I would actually go ahead and actually review their book. And I've not looked at Elysian Fields before. I've seen it on Indiegogo, but I haven't actually really explored it all that much. And considering that they offered me a free copy of issue 0 to go ahead and review that, as well as take a look at their sequel, Elysian Fields: The Pyramid Gambit, I felt obligated to go ahead and give this a proper review. So the first thing, let's go ahead and today take a look at Elysian Fields issue 0, and tomorrow we're going to actually go ahead and take a look at the sequel, The Pyramid Gambit. So first things first, I'm going to have to go ahead and consider this a paid sponsorship on these videos, which is how those videos are going to be tagged, because I did receive a free copy of issue 0, and to my mind, that qualifies as a payment. But regardless of whether or not I am approached by somebody, if I'm asked to go ahead and review a book, if someone gives me a free book to go ahead and review their book, one thing remains the same. I am always going to give you an honest review and an honest opinion of what I think of a book and where it could use some improvements. Because if I don't, then there's really no point in anyone listening to a single thing I have to say. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Elysian Fields issue 0 promo video. Let's see what that looked like.
Hey there, welcome to the Elysian Fields crowdfunding campaign. Thanks for giving us a check out. Elysian Fields started off as just a game between friends. Nerdy kids debating which mythic heroes would win pitted against each other. Over the years, as things grew, this became a concept I fixated on, knowing the potential that it could have as a story. Now it's a living, breathing thing, and for it to succeed, I need you. So come check out our Indiegogo campaign and see what you can do to bring Elysian Fields issue 0 to print and beyond. Thank you.
Okay, not bad. I mean, that video could have been a little bit tighter. We probably could have squozed that down. Squoze, is that a real word? I don't care. Anyways, we could have compacted that down to probably 30 seconds instead of 44 seconds. So I think that could have been tightened up a little bit. But overall, you know, okay. I've definitely seen worse promo videos than that. So let's go ahead and let's actually talk about the comic book itself. So I've gone ahead and I've actually already read this. Let's first off go ahead and begin by talking about the people involved, which, as you can see, is the story done by Michael Odin, the art done by Marcelo Oliveira Costa, and the lettering done by Luke Stone. So I went ahead and read this book, and the first thing I want you to know is that this book, as you can see right here on the cursor, is 40 pages long. When I read this book, I felt like it was only 12 pages long. And that wasn't because of a lack of story, it's because the story moves that briskly. And I gotta say, this is a pretty cool story idea. It's all about the Greco-Roman pantheon and the heroes from ancient Greek mythology duking it out with each other in the afterlife. Hence the title of the work, Elysian Fields. Now, I myself am really big into ancient Greek mythology. I'm really big into Egyptology, so this is right up my alley. When it comes to fantasy books of all different mediums, the classic sword and sandals storylines definitely do not get as much play as they did in Age of Yore. And I am glad to see somebody decided to actually tell a story based on these classic characters. And for the purpose of this book, the main character that we're going to actually be dealing with is going to be Achilles. And there you see him right there in the corner. As I'm reading through this book, it looks good. It's a really cool looking book. The artwork is pretty good, but there is a major problem that I ran into as I was reading through this comic book, and it was not the story, it has to do with the artwork. And no, it's not what you think. In this book, Marcelo Oliveira Costa is literally doing all of the artwork. He is doing pencils, he is doing inks, he is doing colors. And it is plainly obvious as you are reading through this book, Marcelo Oliveira Costa is being pulled in too many directions and being asked to do too many things on a single project. Michael Odin's story is absolutely fantastic. It's riveting, it's compelling, and seeing these characters come to life is a delight. Luke Stone does an absolutely professional job putting together the lettering on this book. But in all honesty, I think too much is being asked of Marcelo Oliveira Costa, and it is, in the end, hurting the book. Now, before we go any further, I need to give you a little bit of background on your Uncle Inch High Comic Guy. Back in the day, I worked as a graphic design artist. And my primary job was editing photographs, doing color corrections, and, you guessed it, coloring comic books. Now, I haven't colored comic books professionally in any way in the better part of 25 years. Not because I couldn't keep doing the job if I wanted to, it's because I didn't want to. Coloring a comic book is time-consuming and tedious work. And I freely admit, I hated coloring comic books. Your job is work for hire. No one respected the work that you were doing, as particularly back when I was coloring comic books. And on top of all of that, when you're doing this as a work for hire, that means you also get to do an entire free set of corrections on behalf of the client. And there's one thing I learned really quick coloring comic books for indie creators who didn't know what they were doing. My eye for coloring was always better than their eye for coloring. And oftentimes when they asked me to quote unquote fix things, they would invariably return to my original work because what I did was better than what they wanted. So now that I have qualified that, let's go ahead and let's take a look at the very first page of this comic. Here we have the first page of the comic, and there's already a problem. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to point it out. Over here in the upper left-hand corner, we have a lens flare. This lens flare is in the place of actually drawing in the rising sun. Everyone's wearing bronze armor for the most part, and the bronze armor is not bronze. It is yellow. It's worse than yellow. It's canary yellow, which would be fine if they were wearing gold, but they're not wearing gold. They're wearing bronze. On top of that, you take a look at the walls of Troy, and on this very first panel, we have a huge problem. And that is, it looks like somebody pissed all over the color palette. We have too much yellow and everything is bleeding together in the lower half of the first panel. Next, the light source is off. If the light source is the sun cresting over these hills in the background, then things in the foreground where these soldiers, their armored helmets, this should be darker than everything else in front of them. The walls of Troy should almost be completely blacked out because they're on the opposite side of the actual light source. This is a huge problem. We come down over here to the second panel, and we have King Memnon facing off against Achilles. Forget the fact that the sword design's incorrect for both of them. Once again, it's gold, and it's the same gold that we have here, as if there's a second sun sitting right behind them, or this entire event is taking place like it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. It just doesn't fit correctly. Not to mention, the lighting on Memnon is incorrect because the light source should be behind Memnon. Therefore, his face in the center should be darker and the highlight should be along the sides of his head. Whereas with Achilles, because he's facing towards the rising sun, or at least the sun should be off to his side slightly, his face should be fully illuminated. And the coloring, because the sun is only just coming up, should give us some fairly harsh shadows across his face wearing the helmet. There's no coloring on his upper lip, and this also fails to break up his facial features in this scene. Lastly, we don't have enough color contrast going on. I mean, in the first page, or the first panel, everything is yellow. There's very few things in the first panel that isn't yellow. Then you get down to the second panel. Now we have yellow, we have brown, we have red, we have green. We have both the hero and the villain character wearing red. So this fails to provide us a lot of contrast. There's a touch of blue to the hemline of his little toga thing that he's wearing underneath his armor. That, however, doesn't give us enough contrast to differentiate him from the other guy. The best thing in this panel is him wearing this green sash on King Memnon. But because his pants are red and his legs are right next to Achilles' leg, it all bleeds together. Finally, when you come to the third and fourth panel, the blue doesn't match the blue being used in the sky, and this isn't a real sky. This looks like it's a procedural map that you would have gotten out of like Adobe or Corel Photo Paint. So that doesn't work. And as we come down here, when we take a look at the third panel, we can see that the artist is rushing. He's got all this great detail work that he's trying to do, but the coloring is just not selling it. And as a result, because the coloring is not very good, all the artwork where the pencils and inks do look good is getting spoiled. Now, I would be an a-hole if I didn't offer some alternatives. So I want to show you what I put together with the exact same page, but doing a little bit of adjustment in about 20 minutes of work. So let's go ahead and take a look at what I had versus what they had. And there you go. Bronze is a very brownish metal that has a gold luster to the highlight in the light and has kind of almost an orange patina to it. Bronze is not canary yellow. Bronze is not gold. And here, what we've done is we've gone ahead and darkened up the characters in the foreground of the image because their backs are away from the primary light source, which is the rising sun in the hills. We left the rest of the soldiers the way they were because I didn't want to spend the time to fix that, and we left the walls the way they were, but if I had more time or was willing to put in more time, I probably would have had the walls all in black silhouette with some yellow highlights to it. As I said, don't really have a lot of time, but I think you'll agree by darkening the foreground, it gives the image a layered effect and helps create a sense of depth to the work. Going to the second panel, you see that we've defined the hem of Achilles' costume as blue. This way we have this bronze colored armor with red and blue accents, denoting him as our hero by using classic primary colors. We also went ahead and changed the color on Memnon's leggings to be green to not only match his sash, green, purple, these are classic colors used to identify villains and opponents. When we come to the third panel, you'll see that we put the dark area in the center of the face and kept the highlights on the side. This goes ahead and makes King Memnon look a little bit more accurate. I also went ahead and adjusted the color on the blue to better match the blue that we're getting in the sky. Finally, we added some additional hard highlights to Achilles' face and we colored his upper lip. These minor changes to the color palette significantly improve the overall work. And this is the benefit of having yourself a dedicated colorist. As I was saying, I think that Marcelo Oliveira Costa is being taxed too much by being asked to do too much. I think that if his primary focus was just pencils and inks, then he would have the time necessary to add the additional detail that he clearly wants to add to his line art. And if you've got a dedicated colorist who can go in there and actually improve the work instead of overtaxing Marcelo by making him do everything, that it would certainly elevate Elysian Fields to a higher grade. In this situation, there really isn't much that we can talk about. I mean, we can talk about, for example, the cover page. Let's take a look at that. So here's our cover page. And again, it looks fine, but once again, we have the line art is being sacrificed for the coloring because the artist does not have the time to do everything. The interior art, because the artist has to do the coloring on top of pencils and inks, once again is getting sacrificed, and he's not able to put in all the detail he clearly wants to put in to his pencils and inks because he knows he also has to come through and color this whole thing. As a result, the pencils and ink barely make it to being a 3 when it should, with a little bit more time and care, clearly been a 4. And while Marcelo is clearly a gifted artist, he is not a gifted colorist. The coloring on this book is a clear 2, which unfortunately also has the effect of negatively impacting the artwork in the entire book. The biggest piece of advice I can give the guys working on Elysian Fields: get yourself a dedicated colorist and let Marcelo focus on what he needs to be focused on, which is the pencils and the inks, not worried about having to color this whole thing while he's also doing all the other work. The lettering throughout the book looks good. It's clearly of a professional quality, and I've got absolutely no problem giving the lettering used throughout the book a clear 3 out of 5. It's professional level and exactly what I would expect from Stone. And the writing in this book exemplifies some of the very best that I've seen in Comicsgate. I mean, this is a 4 out of 5 as far as the writing is concerned. This is a fun, interesting, compelling story with a really interesting take on these ancient Greek heroes. But because the artist's time is being sacrificed to do coloring on top of pencils and inks, it detracts from the entire work. And as a result, the cover artwork at best gets a 2 out of 5. The interior artwork, which could have been a 4, gets downgraded to a 3. The coloring, which frankly would barely be considered professional work back in the 1980s, by modern comic book standards, is only a 2. The lettering, solid 3 out of 5. And the writing, 4 out of 5. Really, really good story. And since there's no packaging to speak of, because this is a digital comic book that I received, that gives this book an unfortunate score of 2.3 out of 5. Frankly, what I want to see is a prestige version of this book. I would love to see the artist go back over the pencils and inks, make some improvements as far as that's concerned, and find yourself a dedicated colorist who really knows what they're doing when it comes to coloring a comic book to go ahead and elevate the work. Elysian Fields, story-wise, is so good, it should be a 4 out of 5, and it's not. And frankly, that is heartbreaking. But regardless of any of the challenges that this book is currently facing, again, because you only have 3 guys working on this thing, and the artist being overtaxed. But even with all of those challenges, this is a book that is worth getting, because the story alone, in my opinion, makes Elysian Fields a must-have book for any member of Comicsgate. And tomorrow, we're going to go ahead and talk about the sequel for this book, Elysian Fields, The Pyramid Gambit, because this is definitely a book and a series of books that are being made by Michael Oden that are worth investing and checking out, and I'm looking forward to going over the new Elysian Fields book that is in demand right now on Indiegogo. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow.